Good afternoon, everyone. Could I have your attention? We're going to get started. I'm Emily Akhtarzandi, Managing Director of AtlanticLIVE, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Atlantic Festival Ideas Exchange, the Race to 5G. Today, we are going to talk about speed, the speed that data travels, the speed that devices connect with other devices, and the speed of our daily lives. Advances in 5G will enable smarter connections and unleash advances across industries, including healthcare, manufacturing, and transportation. What has to happen for the U.S. and our economy to take advantage of 5G's potential? We have two commissioners of the FCC here with us today to talk about this. Before we jump in, I'd like to thank Intel for their support of the Atlantic Festival and today's exchange and for making this conversation possible. And with that, I'd like to welcome Asha Keddy, Intel's Vice President and General Manager, Next Generation and Standards, to share a few thoughts. Asha?
Thank you, and hello, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. And what I get to do at Intel is work on next generation technologies, which means it's a fun job that helps define the future, including like how we prototype, do standards and trials, and 5G. 2G was about voice. When we did 3G, we weren't quite sure what we were doing. But then there's an app for that, changed everything. And then it became more data-centric, and smartphones happened. 4G, we even created the internet media services and all kinds of things, and we were doing an IP revolution. But what really happened is the OTT, or over-the-top things, the Uber, Airbnb, and all of that took real advantage of 4G and made it what it is. And then the need for 5G, where we could connect everyone and everything to form a fully connected, mobile, intelligent society that presented itself. So that's what we've been working on 5G. How do we solve smart cities, and how do we solve massive amounts of data going through at super fast speeds while doing smart cities, smart networks, different problems, different latencies, different speeds, and having a framework that can solve all of this. At Intel, one of the things we do is when you have to solve this kind of problem, it's not about phones. It's not about interpersonal use anymore. It's about billions of devices being connected to each other. And the data goes into zettabytes, or 1,000 million times what it was 20 years ago, and huge numbers. It also implies a huge amount of potential for jobs and other things. And we look at it from a cloud, a network, and a client point of view, because you can't get this data around if you don't re-architect the network. It's not just about the kinds of devices and the information flows. So that's what we're doing at Intel. We're also, as working across the industry on many kinds of use cases. And one of the things I like to say is, technology is predictable. What humans do with it is not, which means once we get these networks out and these capabilities, we'll see an innovation that will make the 4G revolution look tame. Now, with that, we are working across industries, across live trials, solving these kinds of challenges, including millimeter wave, which from a land point of view, if you compare, is more like swarms, garden hose speeds of data, fire hose speeds of data, and then working with the, doing all these trials across US. And what we're here today is to talk about speed and what are the things that we need to do to make all of this happen. With that, I would like to say that welcome Steve Clements, and we have an excellent panel that has been put by the Atlantic. And welcome everybody, and enjoy.
Thank you, Asha. And a bit of housekeeping that I'm sure all of you are already familiar with. If you could please silence your cell phones, but don't put them away. We'd like for you to join the conversation on Twitter. Use the hashtag AtlanticFest. And we will be taking questions from the audience. So after each panel, be thinking of the questions you'd like to ask, rather. And now to our first conversation. Please welcome FCC Commissioner Michael O'Reilly and the Atlantic Steve Clements. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Well, Mr. Commissioner, I bet you're not used to standing like this unless people are really angry. Thank you so much for joining us. So, yeah, you know, this is, I don't know if this is a friendly audience, but I'm hoping. In any case, we're talking about 5G today, and which is, you know, the next big leap in communications infrastructure. And why don't you share with us, and I don't think this mic is working, guys, why don't you share with us what you think the big parameters are that we need to get right in terms of getting 5G right?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I thank you for closing the roads on an exciting day next door. That's going to make a lot of friends for everybody. I appreciate it. And thanks for standing room only. That doesn't happen that often, maybe in my family, but they usually are just as angry as at the FCC. So, to your point in terms of, you know, what is 5G or what are the parameters that needed to succeed in 5G, I think there's a couple of things. One, we have to get the technology right, and our industry is far and away leading the charge. Two, we have to deal with things that are at my job, at my level, at the FCC. What policies can we address that would provide the environment for carriers and providers to be able to get 5G out to businesses and residential customers. And so that means making sure we have enough spectrum and having infrastructure. And that's what I'm spending all my time on the Commission, on those things. That is the highest priority for the Commission, one of our chief obligations at the current moment, and is what we spent most of our time on.
Let me just ask everybody in the room, because this is a cool mixed crowd, I think. How many of you actually know what 5G means? Okay, those are the knowers. And who are the not knowers? Okay, so why don't we, yeah.
No, but I say that in jest. If I asked everyone here, what is 5G to you, you would get so many different answers. And now some of you could rattle off.
So what's 5G to you?
That's a good. You could rattle off. I was about to get there. You can say, oh, okay, it's the standard that was just adopted. You know, the first part of the standard, or it's going to be the second part of the standard, and that's what 5G is. Look when I talk 5G, it is higher speeds, lower latency, higher capacity, and to a factor far beyond what we get in 4G. People talk about 100 times in speed, you know, latency down to the millisecond or below. I mean, things that are incredible in terms of what the capacity to handle so much more, and the billions of devices that our previous speaker talked about. That's a wonderful environment. It's going to require an awful lot of effort. But in terms of the definition, it moves depending on who you exactly talk to at the moment.
So another thing I read about you, not to put
there's a lot of bad things.
Yeah. No, I don't read bad things. I just read striking things. So you had this, you know, interesting, striking comment that in talking about regulation in this area, you were speaking to a group and said, "I hate that word, regulate," but that you thought in this area we need to, that there has to be something, and this has become your central obsession in your life.
Well, in fairness, I think I said
you become a centrally obsessed regulator.
I think I said I hate the word regulator, not regulate. Regulator, you know, has connotations with it. Regulate is an obligation in the statute, and it has burdens that we expect to be able to succeed rules of the road going forward. And here we do need rules of the road in many different cases, and the regulations that we develop are actually pro-competitive, pro-industry in terms of their ability to offer services. And they address the things that I talked about, its spectrum and its infrastructure. So we use our regulations to address the barriers to entry that many state and local governments are imposing. So regulations can be beneficial to the offering of services, and though I do regulate, I don't necessarily like the word regulator, I must admit.
So that's fair. I'm a fan, as some of my friends here know, of smart cities. I talk a lot about smart cities, interested in how we're all going to be loaded up with little diodes and sensors in our wrists, and you know, the doors will open automatically. There will be kind of a density of sensors in the world, you know, whether it's with transportation, autonomous vehicles, measuring all sorts of things. But we're looking at a retrofit of society, at least of the urban experience, which is pretty profound. What do you have to achieve? What are the infrastructure costs? Because, you know, one of the things that people may not know, as I understand from talking to both, whether it's Intel, Qualcomm, I'll mention both, not to, you know, be pleasant to everybody, but, you know, anybody in this game, I have, you know, kind of talked to about the density of sensors that are needed, the density of investment infrastructure. It's pretty huge. Are we going to be able to live with that?
Steve, you're completely ignorant.
See? That was pre-planned.
He said I wouldn't say it. No, no, I take that back.
Yeah. No. See, yeah, thank you. And I have words for you in a moment.
I think it's fair to say no one can predict exactly or have a really good picture of what's going to develop. We do know that the wearable universe, the billions of devices are going to come. They are going to happen.
Not just wearable, but like cars.
No, I do believe the sensors. Yeah, absolutely. I do think autonomous cars are going to require a ton of investment in infrastructure. It's going to require a ton of sensors that don't exist today. It's going to require, that's why you need the advanced 5G infrastructure that can carry the capacity of all of the information, all of that data going back and forth. In many instances, it's short distances. In others, it's long distances. You need a network that's capable of doing that. 4G LTE is incredibly powerful. It will go on for a number of years, but it's not capable of all the things that you mentioned. And so I do believe society is going to become smarter. It's going to have more capabilities. Technology is going to be more ingrained in our daily basis. And it's part of that sensor. It's part of all of those things that go along with that.
So there's no controversy at all about little small cell towers and cell things.
Oh, look at towers. You use the word tower, antenna. You use the word infrastructure. That does cause enormous problems amongst those that have authority today and don't want to see things change. And we've had problems. The Commission has been very aggressive in trying to remove barriers to entry, so those towers can be installed, those antennas can be installed, that infrastructure can be placed, so those cars can talk to each other. Right. Those cars can talk to not only the cars themselves, but the other, the bicyclist, the every moving device that's happening around the walking person. Everything can be connected in one form, but it's going to require enormous investment in money and dealing with the barriers to entry. And so I've been very aggressive in telling state and local governments that my first responsibility is to, in the state, is to the people and the consumers in getting service to all Americans. They don't not necessarily like that, and they've had difficulty in terms of how fast they're willing to process applications and the extraction that they've tried to make from providers in terms of dollars that they think that they deserve for use to place these devices, and that's incredibly problematic right now.
Yeah, I am going to make a rare admission of ignorance. My friend Greg Stanko is back here, and in 1999, how many years ago is that? 19 years nearly. We worked at the Economic Strategy Institute, and our place was obsessed with spectrum auctions. I hated the topic. I really despised talking about spectrum, and I thought it went away, and it's come back like steel sanctions.
It's so good
so
to
it's
be
like
here.
A Rip Van Winkle thing. So didn't we sell all the spectrum before? I mean, this is an area that I am ignorant. Or are you stealing more from the Pentagon? Like tell me the spectrum story in like a minute.
Sure. All spectrum is allocated, so we didn't sell all the spectrum. There are people who had licenses they didn't pay for at auction. We are trying to reallocate rather than steal from federal users today.
Like the Pentagon.
Well, they are one holder of a number of bands that we would like to reallocate. Yes, Congress has designated us and required them to do certain things, and so we move forward on that. They are the biggest holder of federal spectrum, and so we see instances where they can provide us more commercial spectrum. Yes.
You sound a little... I think I accidentally touched a nerve.
No. To use the word steal is probably problematic with DOD, national security, and things like that. I think we work with them extensively to find those instances where they no longer need the spectrum, and we reallocate it for enormously beneficial purposes.
Okay, let's go to tariffs. Lots of the... I want to do with you this with all the time with you. So tariffs, a lot of the widgets, the phones, the systems, the 5G infrastructure that we have is possibly going to be made elsewhere, which we're now putting tariffs on. And at least one of the concerns that an unnamed other commissioner has talked about the fact that we may be creating conditions that are really bad for 5G rollout in America, that we're putting up speed bumps and hurdles just as we're getting to a point where we get to adopt. And so I'm also, again, ignorant in this area. Do we run the problem of risk of standards or leadership in the world if we create barriers right now to this? And I'm sort of specifically thinking about China. And just one other corollary is very aware, it was a Singapore case, but like Singapore sometimes is blurred in with China in this White House. And No, I think that's a generous and fair comment. But, you know.
As long as you declare it to be.
Okay. but you know, Qualcomm the acquisition of Qualcomm was blocked by Broadcom because of concerns, national concerns about our competitiveness. And I know this is something you care about. So are you worried that the sanctions regime that we have coming into place harms your vision for 5G everywhere with an American brand?
I like to be careful on this front because I used to do trade policy in my past life with a different...
Can we get him a drink?
I'm getting to the answer. Let me get...
Okay.
I used to do... So the answer is trade policy is a very interesting cat and mouse game or chess game as you want. So I'm loath to say that we're going to see these actual tariffs into place. It is a complicated... discussions and negotiations that you have. It's very likely, in my opinion, from someone who has past experience, but is not involved in any capacity and has no authority of that process today, that those things may work themselves out as negotiations continue. Things regarding NAFTA, or what was formerly known as NAFTA, looked pretty dire for a long while, and the deadlines approached, and then things worked themselves out. So trade matters and trade barriers have a tendency to work themselves out. Maybe not exactly on the deadline, but pretty close. So I'm not as worried about the immediate possibility of tariffs. If we get to that point that they are implemented, then I'm happy to come back and talk to you.
I'm going to talk about our underwriter for a moment, and I'm not doing it because it's our underwriter, but it's a substantive point, so I just want to make that clear.
Sure.
And I want to go to all of you just after this, but I had the privilege earlier in my life to know Gordon Moore, to know Andy Grove, to know Craig Barrett, to have met Noyce and some of the folks that were the early incredible genius of the semiconductor industry, and Intel was so fundamental to that. I mean, Intel changed the world. And in that, the Semiconductor Industry Association and Semitech were created to basically save an industry that had been targeted by subsidies and others. And, I wonder if we're at an incipient stage on some of the 5G areas. So when you look at national competition, do we need to begin anticipating that China, that India, that other players are going to target this industry in such a way that they want to control standards, they want to control deployment, they want to control technology, that we need to begin looking at companies like our underwriters, but other players in this as well? And I think that was what the CFIUS issue was about. Do you think about that all in your role? And can you comment on that? Because I raised the question of whether or not this is an industry so important that we actually, America not being in it would be of just disastrous consequence.
Oh, absolutely. If we were to step aside and let 5G pass us by, we would be giving up enormous opportunity for economic growth and all the benefits that come and technology leadership for decades from now on. We're the leader in 4G technology because we were the first to be there and we did the right policies. Other countries have followed that and they've realized what can be harmful if they aren't first. So there's 4 or 5 countries in the globe that are trying to be first in 5G, and they are using their mechanisms in standard-setting bodies and the ITU, and I've talked about this. They are using those at the expense of the United States. They are intentionally using that structure to try and target the United States and use that to advantage their companies in 5G. That's incredibly problematic from my perspective. I do think there's a national security element to that, and why you see things like CFIUS, that's why you see things like Team Telecom, that's why you see things like supply chain, because it is a national security issue, and that's why you see what I like to describe what the Commission does, and though we're not involved in a lot of those things, what I like to say the Commission involved, we don't design industrial policy, we're responding to other countries' industrial policy, which is to beat the United States. Instead,
do we need an industrial policy?
Well, I think we have the formation of a policy that's not industrial policy, but it's built on economic freedom and the free capitalist society that ingrained in our economy, and that means providing the right environment for our U.S. carriers and the companies that make technology to feed into that to succeed. And so that means removing barriers to entry. It means addressing the spectrum issues and giving them the tools to then compete both domestically and globally.
So Mike O'Reilly, I was going to say Mike O'Reilly. Mike O'Reilly is in favor of a reactive industrial policy as opposed to a proactive.
No, it's a very proactive one, knowing that their policy is coming. I know China has an industrial policy. They've been working on it. They are trying to corner the market in 5G.
How good are they?
Well, the technology has certainly improved, and it used to be subpar. It has certainly improved. But there are techniques for competing in standard settings and in the ITU and other mechanisms, and using their investment in other things to trade for advantages in things like 5G is unparalleled to things that have been done
Let's go to all of
before.
you. I just have to say before we go, this is so much of a better interview than I thought it was going to be. This is great. No, man, that's good.
That's a compliment.
Yeah.
Sounds like my family again.
Okay, yeah, let's go right.
Thank you for being here today.
It's been a long day.
Edward Gibson, CEO of Eastern One. And my question is two parts. One is, what role does net neutrality play in FCC policy?
There you go.
Thank you. And the other is, what can the FCC do to help ensure privacy or set privacy standards, given the concerns about that?
Sure.
Super, thank you.
Okay, I'll take the second one first, but I won't ignore the first. Okay, so in terms of privacy issues and security, I have mentioned multiple times that the Congress hasn't given us authority over those issues in statute. If they were to change that, if they were to give us authority, I would be the first one to implement whatever they asked. I do not believe, if you read our law, that we have that authority today. It is one particular provision. People always point to Section 222 and say, that gives you authority over everything. I disagree with its reading. I disagree with its scope and agree with its application. It was meant for telephone numbers. It's in telephone calls, much different than the universe of the entire broadband or the internet universe or the app economy. So I think our role is very limited. However, to your first point, you can't get through an event without talking about net neutrality, right? Got to talk about net neutrality.
I didn't bring it up.
No. You might have planted the question, but look I think there is common agreement over the principles of net neutrality. The fight has always been over the specifics and how do you implement it and what does that mean. There are components of net neutrality that we all agree in, but then there's some we don't. I disagree wholeheartedly with a ban on paid prioritization, and I've been fighting that because I think there's good things that can come from paid prioritization. There's also bad things that can come from paid prioritization. So instead of having a ban on all of it, I want to segment that out. Instead, if I say that, and I've given that speech 100 times, if I say that, they'll, oh, you don't believe in net neutrality, oh my gosh, we're going to picket your house. There are thoughtful people could design a net neutrality law in Congress that would work for everybody. But it's not, that conversation is not happening. Instead, you see things where people are using the political process for their own particular benefits. They think it's a voting issue. They go to California and they do their crazy little new law. And you go, what do you do with this thing? You know, they banned zero rating, which even we didn't do at the FCC, and nobody has tried to do that I know of except them. So, I mean, they've tried to push it as far as they can and say, oh, that's now the gold standard. If that's gold, then I want to operate in a different currency, because that is broken and wrong. And so I think it's our obligation under our rules and under the statute and authority Congress has given us to preempt that situation, and we will move forward to make that happen.
Yes, right over here.
Hank Wallace of Write and Speak Like the News. What will 6G be? This is in the spirit...
Really irritated because I was saving that for our next speaker. But
well, this is indeed, Stephen, likewise.
Go ahead, but just don't tell him too much.
This is in the spirit of what have you done lately, Commissioner O'Reilly.
Yes.
But indeed, as you're working on 5G, do you think ahead to what would be next?
Well, look, I only have such a long life. And my term's only so long. I will tell you, I posed that exact question, but not in terms of 6G. When we were working, before the commission was still at 2.5G, and they were working on 3G, I said, why don't we skip 3G and go to 4G? And you look what 4G is, 3G had some benefits. 4G, wow, amazing. And that's why I was like full motion video. I'm this younger guy at the time, and the people were looking at me like I had, two heads. You talk to me about 6G, and I'm like, I'm still focused on 5G. My universe is a little bit narrow. I would love to be thinking 10, 15, 20 years down the road. But if these things were in a very good place, I could do that. We got a lot of heavy lifting on the absolute immediate. And then also, I just have a factor of time. My term's only so long. I'm only going to be at the commission, depending on how Congress and the president decide. So I try to do what I can in the time I have.
What's your expiration date?
Wow. Is it the interview? Yeah, the interview's better than I expected, and when are you leaving? Boy. This is officially...
Well, you raised it.
I would just say, officially, my term expires next July 1st. But I could stay on depending on...
Could be reappointed.
I could.
I mean, I'm just going for the facts. So
that's absolutely true.
Right, so.
That's absolutely true.
Right here. Thank you.
Hello,
Are you guys having fun?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
I think someone's been to the bar too quick.
Hello, I'm Chris Bowling. We're from Kentucky. And what about Appalachia and getting 3G and 4G in those areas?
Sure.
No, this
Get rid of
can I
DSL.
piggyback on this for a minute? Because I'm going to ask Jessica Rosenworcel the same thing. A very serious question, because Richard Florida, a friend of ours who helped launch City Lab, senior editor there, wrote this book, The New Urban Crisis, in which he talks about the growing divide between urban dense areas where there's more promise, creative people, denser sensors, smart cities, and areas that are not. And he worries that that creates even a greater demarcation between different worlds, different experiences, different opportunities. And so, so how do you fix that? I mean, I know you have E-rate, but can you do 5G E-rate?
So it's not E-rate.
Yeah, I know it's not E-rate, but yeah.
No, look, I'm going to be in Kentucky next week talking to a number of wireless providers. No. The commission has a new program that they're setting up and standing up, $4.5 billion over the next 10 years to bring everybody in the United States to 4G wireless services. There are a bunch of, it's a spotted United States that doesn't have that today. Mountainous regions, very problematic. Out west, really hard to do. A lot of places have multiple providers today that are getting subsidies, and that doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're trying to figure out, how do we take some that no longer need dollars and make sure that everyone has 4G. We're trying to get everyone up to 4G basis using our Mobility Fund 2 funding. Now, there have been some difficulties in making that happen in terms of who doesn't have service today and doing some of the testing and doing some of the challenges, and we're working through all of that process, and hopefully that will end pretty quick and we can get the dollars flowing to bring the installation forward. But it's not something we've ignored. It's just making it happen. We have the dollars already allocated for that purpose, and it's execution issues.
Great important question. We're going to, unfortunately, we got to go. Oh, yeah. Okay. That's fair. I don't know if that's
See, I made a friend down here.
That may be constituting a gift, but I'm not going to get into ethics stuff right now with the commissioner. But ladies and gentlemen, Mike O'Reilly, Commissioner of Federal Communications. Such a good sport. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Reilly. I knew that interview was going to be great. And now joining Steve is FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel. So Steve is going to come back to the stage. Hopefully we can get him a new microphone as well. Jessica, welcome. And Steve, the floor is yours again. Yes.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. I thought somebody else was going to do this. No, I'm just joking. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us. What's that?
You had so much fun before. The pressure's on.
I know, but I ask all the questions. So let me ask you, how many of you know 5G? No. So we have another commissioner, and so this is the other side. Let me just start off. How much of Mike O'Reilly's world do you agree with when you're a commissioner? Like, how much does your agreement with him overlap or not?
Well, let's start with the fact I'm the only...
Are you starting positively or negatively?
Well,
I'm a cynic.
I'm going to lay out some facts.
Okay.
I'm the only Democrat serving
and
at
the only
FCC,
woman,
and the only woman.
Yeah. So that decreases the overlapping. So the Venn diagram is shrinking.
But we're working on trying to expand where the overlap is. And
how's that going?
Didn't
you think he was better here than you expected he'd be?
He has some ideas that are terrific and some that I think need some further education.
So let's start with the further education. Where do you think he gets it wrong?
Well, I'd start with net neutrality. I'm in favor of net neutrality. I'm the only commissioner at the agency who dissented from the decision to roll back our open internet rules. I think the agency put itself on the wrong side of history, the wrong side of the law, and the wrong side of the American public. But the neat thing in response, the thing that keeps me optimistic is we are seeing extraordinary activity around the country, an interest level in communications, and what the FCC does, that's unprecedented. And so now we have states that are passing laws. We've got governors who are issuing executive orders, mayors who are doing the same. We have litigation that's ongoing, and also we are seeing legislation in Congress. And all of that adds up to me. It's democracy in action. We should support it.
Yeah, so on the 5G front, when you're kind of looking at what is the appetite out there in states and cities to play their role in creating, I don't know what to call it, hospitable environments? Because I understand this is a bit controversial, that there's some worry that states will jump into it and just not move, not invest, not do those things. And so how do you deal, I mean, how would you rate on a scale of 1 to 10 the nation's readiness for a 5G rollout?
Well, we have many communities, many states, so it varies.
If you gave a number, it would be tweeted.
I know. And I'm being very careful not to. Here's the thing. If you want to build a 5G network, you need spectrum. Spectrum gets all the glory in 5G policy.
Would you steal it from the Pentagon?
We're going to have to incentivize the Pentagon and among others to be more efficient with its use. But spectrum, again, gets all the glory. Where it really happens is on the ground, because we need many more towers, many more small cells to make this network work. That's a huge infrastructure challenge. And I think we need to have a federal program to make that work. But we're going to have to figure out how to work with the states and localities as our partners. No big infrastructure project in the history of this country happened without making partners of those local and municipal authorities.
What's the price tag?
Price tag is in the billions for this activity.
Billions is okay.
Yeah, no, we're going to
Really
make it...
only billions?
Depends how you're going to quantify all of this when you talk about spectrum or just deployment and facilities. But here's the thing. We're going to have to figure out how to incentivize all of those states and municipalities to streamline their rules and policies. And we should be looking at every federal grant program we have, every piece of legislation we have, and make sure that if they do streamline, we'll be able to help them with the deployment of this infrastructure and make choices that will lead to its deployment in a more expeditious way.
So let me push you a little bit. How fragile, Commissioner, do you see America's leadership in 5G right now?
That's a good question. I think I see it as much more fragile than my colleagues. So here are some facts. When it came to 4G, we led the world. We have about 5% of the world's population, but at one point we had 50% of its deployment. And it's not an accident, the whole applications economy and the smartphone revolution, it happened here on our shores. So we know that if we lead, we can do big things. But the rest of the world saw that. And right now, you have active efforts underway to clear spectrum in China, to clear mid-band spectrum in a lot of European countries and in South Korea, and they are starting to get it to market faster than we are. We're also seeing many more towers and facilities being built in Asia than we're building here. I don't think that our leadership is secure, and we can't rest on our 4G laurels. We have to be more aggressive.
We can't rest on our 4G laurels. I just wanted to repeat that in case that's a tweetable moment.
Just saying.
Very interesting. But what do we say? I mean, what are the implications of it? I mean, I guess, let me try to, I mean, you heard the question I asked, not related to our underwriter, but on Intel, because Intel was, looked at as a fundamental key part of America's future and on so many different fronts that we created Sematech and we had lots of things. Do you think we're closer to something like that we need a national strategy that's both proactive and protective to make 5G, to get 5G a boost here?
Well, I think the future of 5G is the key to our economic security and our national security. And I think there are things we are doing right now, like with tariffs and trade policy, that are really at odds with our leadership.
Yeah.
I know, I'm taking you there already. But,
yeah, what do you think of the Trump tariffs?
Okay, I'm so glad you asked. On September 24th, they went into place. $200 billion worth of Chinese imports are now subject to a 10% tax. And by the end of the year, it'll be 25%. Now, nobody here should probably do this, but if you comb through the 200 pages of what is in that tariff list, you will find antennas, switches, routers, circuit boards. Those are all of the things you use to build networks in this country. And so by the end of this year, we'll have a 25% tax on all of those piece parts. I think this is one of those cases...
So if I were President Trump talking to you, wouldn't I just say, why don't we just build all those parts here?
Absolutely. We should be making an effort to strengthen our supply chain here. But that's not going to happen in the near term. In the near term, it'll just become more expensive for us to deploy these networks and lead to us following further behind.
So is this another area, that's a standards war down the road? Is China able to manipulate what 5G standards are in such a way that it becomes a barrier to the United States? That used to be the games we played across those lines, even with Europe. And I'm just wondering, because I don't know that dimension of this, but now when we're going from a high trust, borderless world to a high fear, walls up world, how does that work? Do we end up with China potentially getting a leap and then basically setting standards that we end up having to adapt to? And are there economic consequences to that?
Well, I don't think that is inevitable yet, but China has enormous scale and has made an extraordinary investment in equipment and the deployment of these networks. And we need to do the same. If we want the rest of the world to follow, we're going to have to take some of that old-fashioned American innovation and make it happen here.
Now, you have a top secret security clearance, right?
I can't tell you that.
Oh. I'll just take that as a yes. So I'm interested. I mean, I hadn't planned to ask this, but I'm reminded that Jessica once worked for a great U.S. Senator, Jay Rockefeller, and was his communications advisor. But Jay was also the ranking member when I knew him of the Intelligence Committee. So this has led me to think about intelligence. Is how much are the Chinese engaged in serious economic espionage on this front, on the 5G front?
I think it's legitimate to be concerned about that. I think these are the networks of the future. We're not just putting more smartphones in our palms and our pockets. We are connecting everything in the world around us. And there's so much potential for us to be more efficient, more effective, more intelligent. But there's also cyber risk associated with that. And as we deploy our new networks, we need to be thinking about that at the same time.
Now, Mike just kind of, he didn't really quite scoff, but he sort of almost scoffed when I mentioned E-rate. And, the last time I interviewed you some years ago was about the expansion of E-rate. And one of the areas in which I was most interested in expanding was areas like rural Kentucky or rural Ohio or other places, and looking at how you deal with this gap. So can I go back? What's your name? Chris. Chris's question about Kentucky or other parts of the country that are on 2G.
It's such a good question, because here we are talking about 5G. And when I testified in front of the Senate recently, there was another senator who was up there who said, "It's nice you're talking about 5G. I got no Gs." And
which senator was that?
Senator Tester.
Oh, yeah.
It was a terrific line.
It's a great
that
line.
Stays with me because it's true. So here's the first and most important thing I think we need to do to help with rural deployment. We know we have a problem. We have about 24 million people in this country that don't have broadband service at home, don't have any access to it. 19 million of them are rural areas. So these are the communities that are at risk of being consigned to the wrong side of the digital divide. We've got to do something about it. But the first thing we need to do isn't technical. We need better maps. Because here's why. The FCC has maps of where they believe broadband and wireless service are and are not, and they're terrible. They're riddled with errors. I'm an FCC commissioner, and it's wrong about my house. So here's what we need to do. We need to stop sitting here in Washington and thinking we can build nationwide maps of service. We need to start getting the public involved and rely on the wisdom of crowds to start figuring out how we can build better maps and know with greater precision where service is and is not. And then what we need to do is target our programs appropriately. Right now, we're throwing money at this problem without understanding precisely where it needs to go. And I think that's a real problem.
Another zinger, Jessica Rosenworcel says FCC has crappy maps. Just want to get that all for you.
I didn't use that term.
Yeah.
That was your summation.
I want to go back to our friend's question and just ask it for him, since he anticipated what I was going to ask. And yeah, do we not have we need to work on battery technology. Any case, the question on 6G, because I know that you think, in contrast to your Commissioner Val, that we should be thinking about 6G. Or did I get incorrect notes?
No, absolutely.
So you're ready to sort of say, well, we need no Gs, but we got to think about 6G.
Well, you got to think about the future.
What is 6G?
6G. Well, I can make it really nerdy for you.
I have like a cell phone in my dining room, in my living, or cell tower in my. Like, how dense do the towers have to be?
I don't know what's going on in your house if that's what you think is happening.
No, but you're talking about density of capacity, right?
Absolutely. So terahertz frequencies,
right.
spatial multiplexing, densification of our networks that is radical even compared to what we're thinking about with 5G, speeds that could be 1,000 times faster. I think it's worth starting to articulate what we think it is, because here's what happens in wireless technology is every 10 years we move on to the next generation. And if you think about it, this is a pretty good time to start articulating what's happening next, because it's 2018, and I can tell you that about 8 years ago, we were already talking about 5G. So let's start talking about 6G right now, understand what it is, and try to understand what technical and economic barriers will be there if we want to get it deployed everywhere.
Before I go to all of you, so we can have some fun, and I think there's probably a big party in here afterward. You wouldn't. I mean, maybe you all are here for the FCC commissioners, or maybe you're here for drinks.
Yeah, right.
But
it usually goes that way. People just want to hear me talk about terahertz frequencies.
Exactly. Well, we're going to try. But I am interested in the partner. I mean, I want to give you a chance to. I did something recently with another administrator, and I said, you sit in a place that we in the media and those of us in the public look at, report on, and I'm just interested from your perspective, because you're sort of in a Wizard of Oz spot. You see everything in your world that we're trying to understand. So tell us the biggest thing we don't know that you know that we should know.
Well,
I mean, I'm giving you an opportunity. What are we not covering or looking at? What are our blind spots that you have access to? Because I'm interested in, you know, if we were to sit at your desk looking at the contending issues around communications in this country, what should we be more aware of than we are?
Well, I think a lot of discussions about communications and 5G are really in the weeds. I mean, I like to talk about small cells and what's happening in the 28 gigahertz band, but, you know, that's me. I think instead we should start realizing that we have problems to solve, resources that are constrained, and communities that need help navigating what's possible in the digital age. And wireless can be part of that solution. And so instead of talking about technology, let's talk about our problems. We have huge problems with traffic. What if we put sensors in roadside infrastructure and in our cars and in our lights, and then ran a whole contest and rewarded the community that cut commute times by 15 to 20 minutes? We have huge problems with air pollution in this country. Asthma rates are growing and costing us more. How could we use wireless technology to study air particles and figure out which areas are most at risk to have those difficulties and what changes we can make to our civic infrastructure to change it? I'd rather if we started with our problems and started talking about how this new era of connectivity could help us solve them.
Fascinating, powerful. When is your expiration date?
In 2020.
2020. So we've got a couple more years with you. Great.
Like
I
it or
look
not.
forward to many more opportunities. Let me open the floor to questions, comments. So we've got one right here. Yes.
Hi, my name is Bill Courier.
Hi, Bill.
I'm a 5G neophyte. So the question is, are you saying that this is going to happen when certain technological problems are solved, whether it's an infrastructure problem with towers and various other things to take advantage of the tech network build-out? Or is it the fact that the country isn't really ready to take advantage of it if it existed tomorrow? What are we talking about?
Good question. Both ends of the question.
Yeah, we have work to do to be ready. But I think that instead of just talking about our competition internationally, which I'm certainly someone who will do that, I think we should start thinking about how wireless technology and all of this connectivity can help solve problems. And I just feel like there's something backward-looking if we don't start with that, because that really should be the goal. And I think if we start talking about how we can use this technology to solve those problems, there'll be a little more enthusiasm for figuring out how to deploy this infrastructure, when right now we have a lot of fights associated with it.
Other question. Yes, right here. Hi.
Hi. So I
Tell us who you are.
My name is Natalie.
Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
you, Natalie.
I'm happy to be here. So I am interested. I think that access is great, and as we spread access, one of the things that creates a lot of frustration and anger is when that access isn't reliable. So I think back to 9/11, we couldn't communicate with people. You fast forward, Sandy, can't get in touch with people because of the networks. You're at a music festival, there's a problem, and I think that that has a lot to do with, security and safety and just being able. So can you talk a little bit about how, as we advance this technology, how you're also going to be thinking about reliability and what that means?
Yeah, I think actually you make a really great point. You remember the old telephone system, the one with the jack and a wall and the curly cord that I have to explain to the millennials in my office about, right?
Oh, yes.
Yes. That had an independent source of electrical power. So if everything fell apart, you could pick that phone up. So think today about how much of your life is downloaded into that smartphone. And if you're like me, you live in the red zone all the time. Our dependence on commercial power for communications is really unprecedented in our history. And things like Hurricane Sandy, hurricane seasons, 9/11, has started to draw attention to that. And I think it's a broader conversation about our vulnerability right now that we need to have, because we've got incredible computing power that we rely on all the time, but it's based on commercial power, and our communications networks are more vulnerable as a result. And so I think we need a conversation about commercial power as it relates to.
I just want to mention for those that are wondering about coming tomorrow, tomorrow morning I'll be interviewing Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, and that is one of the issues I'm going to be raising with him. It's a different way to think about energy security, essentially, is very different around other kinds of communications, the grid, and I'm fascinated by that. So thank you for pushing that button. Yes. Where we go. Hi.
Hi,
hey.
My name is Taylor Berlan. I'm actually a former FCC intern.
And how did that go?
Well, I was in the office.
Is the
of
FCC cool
Legislative
place? I mean,
Affairs. Yeah, I started last year right after net neutrality was announced, so it was an interesting time to
You mean
to
the
be
death
there.
of net neutrality?
Yeah. But anyway,
Yeah.
my question
Still fighting.
Okay.
Still fighting.
Okay.
Thank you for that.
Well,
I don't
yeah.
intern there anymore, so I can say
Okay.
that.
Right.
So my question is actually about your thoughts on modernizing things like the 911 phone line and the do not call list, some of the other aspects of the FCC's jurisdiction.
Interesting.
Oh my gosh, robocalls are so annoying. We are right now issuing fines for bad actors, and that's great. I mean, we're flooded with robocalls, but here's the thing about issuing fines for individual bad actors. It's like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon. We have a huge problem. It's degrading trust in communications networks. The agency needs to make this a priority, needs to work with Congress to the extent we don't have it, and we need to improve trust in our communications networks. This is reducing it, and I think it's a disaster that deserves a much higher level of attention than we give it.
Just finally, I'm asked, how many of you were in the room when Jose Andres was being interviewed, or I was interviewing John Kerry? Lots and lots. And how many of you had cell phones with you? And how many of them went off? So what in the hell was that? And was this presidential alert designed to disrupt Jose Andres and John Kerry? What was the deal? And did you approve that?
Let's see.
That's your area, right?
It is. It's jointly run by FEMA and the FCC. I mean,
So you are responsible.
responsible for the president reaching all of you in your phones, yeah. The power all runs through my office.
So was it a legitimate thing?
Yes, absolutely. Here's the thing. You probably remember that old beep, beep, beep. This is the emergency
We heard it going off,
broadcast
yeah.
system. We had a system for decades that involved television and radio. And a while ago, we realized, well, actually, the most effective thing we could do is bring your wireless phone into the mix. So this was the first nationwide test of the wireless emergency alert system. And we'll study how it worked, how it didn't, the phones it reached and those it did not. But it's a thoughtful thing to do, because I don't think we should reduce emergency alerts to only being on television and radio. The most modern thing we could do is make those alerts available in your pocket.
So the sacrifice was worth it. Sorry for the distraction during our great interviews. Jessica, just finally, if you weren't an FCC commissioner, what would you be wanting to do?
Oh, that's classified.
Ladies and gentlemen, FCC Commissioner Jessica Rosenworcel, thank you so much.
And thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Steve, and thank you to Intel for making this week possible, and all of you for joining us. And we've got a lot more tomorrow. As Steve mentioned, we have Secretary of Energy Rick Perry, Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer. You won't want to miss it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening. Good night.